Sorry to let you down, but you have more of a it's a bit more rigid than a lot of our essays in literature. So they'll follow a more Englishy approach. And what's generally a structure you can follow is having an introduction, 3 to 4 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. So for an introduction, we may introduce the text, including any relevant background information. And here we really want to include, uh, if these are relevant, all of these, right? When and where the text was written. So say 1950s, right? Um, what was happening in society around the time? Why is that time period relevant? The general zeitgeist or the mood of the society at that time. And then link this to the prompt, what the prompt is asking you to do, and potentially the passages and key ideas that you will be addressing in your essay. Definitely linking to the prompt is something you should have in your introduction, and these you I've listed them in such a way because you're quite flexible with how much you want to link to the passages, if at all, in your introduction. Definitely want you to link in your key ideas in your introduction, though, as part of linking to the prompt, of course. And then introduce your critical pieces, aka, supplementary readings and any additional readings and criticisms you've read, including their author and publication details, any relevant background detail which might affect their interpretation. So, for example, consider what is the critic's own context? What effects are there on their own views and values? What time period was the criticism published in, and what were the views and values of society then, and how would this be important? And then, of course, contentions and key ideas of their piece. If they use a literary perspective, identifying it and explaining it just a little bit, to just pretty much um, elaborate and show that you know what the perspective is, and comparisons between the critics' approaches, if you have, say, several. And then you can have your overall interpretation of the authorial intent. This is an example structure. You might use something else. If you prefer using something recommended by your teacher, use that. And when you state your overall interpretation, optional, but you can make this a little bit of a comparative statement and compare your interpretation in your introduction to what you think the interpretation or contention of the critical piece is. With body paragraphs, the biggest challenge is pretty much just balancing your discussion of the text with your discussion and analysis of both interpretations, because you are expected to do that. So you have to aim for about a 50-50 split between analyzing the text and the critical interpretations. And this is going to be a foolproof structure. And if you follow this, you might end up with 60-40 or 40-60, and that's okay, because it's mainly, for the most part, equally discussed. So this is how not to write if you follow a structure similar to this. Body paragraph 1 might be to do with analysis of the key moment in the text. Body paragraph 2 might be some analysis of your interpretation. And body paragraph 3 might be your analysis of a second interpretation from your supplementary reading. Why is this bad? Um, Essentially, all your body paragraphs, first of all, should center around the idea of interpretations. Having analysis of the key moments in the text as a body paragraph makes no sense. Then, if you are analyzing just your interpretation, it doesn't make sense to bring in evidence that you've already discussed in your body paragraph 1. Also, this is supposed to be slightly comparative tasks. So when we just analyze our interpretation, the critic's interpretation entirely separately, that is not being fulfilled. So both interpretations should be discussed in each paragraph in order to effectively demonstrate an understanding of critical interpretations and how they relate to the key moment of the text. They should be in each body paragraph together, our interpretation and the supplementary readings interpretation. So here is a recommended structure. We may have a topic sentence or an argument. It would outline a conceptual focus for the entire paragraph that's grounded within the key moment. That's the key part of that sentence. It has to be grounded within the key moment. And then we might include reading one. This is the link to our personal interpretation, and we explain how we came to this conclusion about that conceptual focus in terms of our interpretation based on the textual evidence we're analyzing and discussing in this part. And of course, this will have some analysis. So we will be integrating the elements from the key moment of the text that we've determined are relevant, unpacking them through literary perspectives, views and values. We know literary perspectives is optional, right? That we have suggested in our interpretation. So we can go back all the way to the introduction where we can see our interpretation, right? Need to make sure all of the elements of our interpretation are addressed in our body paragraphs and nothing is missing or nothing is like additional ideas that are really huge and we never included them as part of our interpretation. So being really aware of that. But yes, so we incorporate our interpretation first and analyze that. We discuss it using evidence from the key moment of the text we've been given. All of this has to relate to the prompt, and we refer our analysis back to views and values, sort of zooming out, and optionally literary perspectives. Then we will link in the supplementary reading and explain how the critic or the author may have come to their own interpretation based on the textual evidence we have discussed, so justifying their point of view. Even if we don't agree with it, we are acknowledging it as an alternate viewpoint, as we mentioned a little bit earlier about alternate viewpoints. Could you take some other evidence from the key moment in the passage to talk about that supplementary readings interpretation? Yes, you could. Absolutely. And then the interpretation, of course, you want a sort of interpretation sentence where you zoom out to your overall enhanced interpretation of the text based on your initial and secondary readings. This has to relate back to your topic sentence or your argument. So in terms of the conceptual focus for the paragraph, grounded in the key moment and to do with our prompt, what is our overall interpretation? And what are the things we took from the supplementary reading that we do agree with and we do not agree with, and we kind of acknowledge all of that in this sentence or few sentences. So when we bring in reading two, this is where we can talk about the aspects of the supplementary reading that we do and do not agree with. If you have any questions about any of this, guys, again, pop them in the chat. Hopefully I've explained it quite clearly, but the point is, if you're finding that complex and you don't personally want this structure, or you would prefer the structure that's kind of being suggested at your school, you don't have to follow this. We know literature does not have a defined structure. This is just a recommended structure to follow. So for conclusions, here is a recommended structure as well, having a summary of overall viewpoints of both interpretations, yours and the supplementary readings, an outline of similarities and differences between our personal interpretation as well as the critics, and then a sentence or two to tie things up. So say resolve the discrepancies between interpretations, for instance, talk about why the supplementary reading might have such a different interpretation from us for example, such as if it's to do with the context of that author. So something just to nicely tie it up. And I would say, Vika would probably still say you don't need a conclusion for developing interpretation. Maybe it's not required. I will say I can imagine it to be quite a bit unfinished. If we don't have one, I really recommend doing a conclusion for this task in particular.